Hey, hi. Throughout this video, I refer to Yoshi P as the director of Final Fantasy 16. He's the producer. Not sure why I goofed that so many times, but continue. So Final Fantasy 16, from what I've heard, was pretty aight. And Final Fantasy 16, from what you've heard, is coming to PC. But good golly gosh, dear viewer, it seems that Square Enix is planning on bringing Final Fantasy 16 to other platforms potentially. It's almost like when you put a game on more than one platform, it can make money from more than one platform. Crazy how that would be appealing to a business trying to make money. And the PlayStation dudes are losing their mind at losing a PS5 console exclusive? Gosh, mister, what a surprise this all is. I'll never understand the diehard PlayStation guys who act like Final Fantasy belongs to them, or that Sony created this franchise out of sticks and leaves. Like, little history lesson, Final Fantasy started out as a Nintendo exclusive, but in case that's too far back for you to comprehend, the Final Fantasy game before 16 was Final Fantasy 15, and Final Fantasy 15 was multi-platform. So really, no matter how you want to slice this, making a sequel to a multi-platform game into an exclusive was a really lame move. But in general, I think it's comical that Sony dudes are so desperate for W's that they've been bragging about a third-party exclusivity deal for a franchise that they had no hand in establishing. But I'll always bring it back to this. If you think the game is good and worth playing, shouldn't you be happy that it's going to more platforms? So, like I said, news broke the other day about Final Fantasy 16 potentially moving to other platforms once the PC version is finished, which raises some questions to me about how much of a stink Sony rose about this game's exclusivity, because I mean, the PS5 version had technical problems out the butt, and it's not like keeping it on the PS5 did it any favors in terms of sales, especially if they were just gonna put it on PC anyways. Like, it's not like the Final Fantasy team wanted this game exclusive to PS5, that much is very clear at this point. But the game's director has stated they're considering bringing the game to more platforms once the PC version is finished. He didn't specify which platforms, but given the fact that Square Enix RPGs like Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts have been available on the Xbox plenty of times before this, it's safe to assume that they're at least considering an Xbox port, you know, Sony contracts notwithstanding. So while it's not confirmed, I really don't think it's out of the question at all to at least discuss the possibility of an Xbox port of Final Fantasy 16. And since the PlayStation diehards recently ran a bunch of victory laps about Xbox games going multi-platform, you better believe that some of them were melting down horde over this statement from the Final Fantasy 16 director. So come along with me, dear viewer, because we're going to point and laugh at some PlayStation fanboys who don't understand how business works and somehow don't think it benefits a game publisher to sell more copies of their video game, and at the very least, we can pull some comedy from the fact that the mere possibility of a third-party PlayStation exclusive, not even a first-party, the possibility of a third-party PlayStation exclusive going to Xbox generated a gigantic salt pile, so there's a little something for everyone in today's video. When, oh when will they learn? Max Otaku responds to the quote from the director and says, "I pray y'all retire soon so we can get competent people in these positions." Right, because Square Enix wanting to make more money off a game that they already made is incompetent. Making more money and more profits is the result of incompetence. Or maybe you might just be kinda stupid. The Dark Side says, why bother bringing it to Xbox? Who wants a Series S version running at 480p 30 FPS? Maybe he talks about the Switch too. Bro, the irony of you bringing up bad performance on the Xbox and then turning around and be like, no, maybe he means the Switch. Like, the Switch 2 is not going to be a technical powerhouse by any means. It is at best going to be on par with the other consoles. And in case you forgot, the only other console to run this game is the PS5, and the PS5 was shitting itself to run this thing. Like, using bad performance as a reason to not release the game on other platforms is just kinda stupid, because that's the only version of the game that exists right now. And it's extra stupid if you're then going to immediately suggest a Nintendo port of this game. That generic Eric says, so before the delusional, lobotomized Xbot fan base claims Final Fantasy 16 is coming to Xbox, check this out. These are the exact words said. At no point does this confirm an Xbox version, merely hinting at it. These Xbots claim facts are myth and they claim rumors are facts. Then he attaches this quote that says, Yoshida said they are thinking about moving to other platforms after the PC. Of course, the natural assumption is that he's referring to porting Final Fantasy 16 to Xbox. That's what caused you to break down? The fact that he said they're thinking about going to other platforms and it's natural to assume it's Xbox. That's what caused this. Jesus Christ. Okay, so the director of a game says they're considering platforms other than the PC, and it's already on the PlayStation. Xbox is kind of the only other option right now. The Switch 2 is not out yet, and we don't know what kind of performance it's going to be getting, but it's safe to assume that Square would have an easier time getting the Xbox version of this game done and released quicker than a Switch 2 version of this game for obvious reasons. You know, the Switch 2 isn't out yet in case it's not obvious enough why Xbox would probably be considered first. I just think it's so funny to see you have such a heartbroken, lashy-outy response to this news, to the point that you're trying to act like the mere idea of an Xbox port being in consideration is an absolute impossibility, even though based on everything the literal director of the game said, it seems like it's at least a little bit of a possibility. Maybe instead of instantly expressing your anger, you should look inwards to see why you're feeling that anger, because this is just fucking weird. You're allowed to have a negative opinion of Final Fantasy 16 going to Xbox, sure, but being in complete denial of the very concept is bizarre. I thought Final Fantasy fans would want more people to play the games they like so much, because Final Fantasy fans are on multiple platforms, not Final Fantasy 16 fans, which is kind of lame. That's the whole argument for it going to other platforms, because I'd imagine it's kind of hard to be a fan of a franchise if you never know which entries of the franchise are going to be exclusive to a certain platform. It's almost like third-party exclusivity is really fucking lame. Again, using Final Fantasy in the console war is just cheesy, because it's the embodiment of Sony's obsession with console exclusivity. I mean, it's not like Square Enix wants to be PlayStation exclusive. They port their games to other platforms at the first possible opportunity, basically 100% of the time. Like, why are you so eager to use Final Fantasy in the console war when it's so obvious that Square Enix wants nothing to do with the console war? Frostbite Fury responds to this lash out and says, damn, they're still begging for Final Fantasy. And Generic Eric responds, says, they'll always beg, demonize exclusive, and praise Phil and Green Turd. They have no brains, standards, common sense, intelligence, or any sense of reality. And yeah, in case you didn't catch this little detail in the screenshots, yes, from the time that this first screenshot was taken by yours truly, and this second screenshot was taken by yours truly, like in between those two screenshots, OP closed his replies, which is always a sign of absolutely phenomenal takes. But the fact that you're saying Xbox fans have no sense of reality when this whole thing started by you lashing out at Xbox fans because of something said by the Final Fantasy 16 director, like the director alluded to an Xbox port, Xbox fans are like, hey, look, he alluded to an Xbox port, and you started pissing yourself. The idea of Final Fantasy 16 going to other platforms upsets you that much because you absolutely worship PlayStation. Like, look at this projection. They have no brains, standards, common sense, intelligence, or sense of reality. But all of this started because a game with the PlayStation logo might possibly be available on Xbox in the future. That's all that happened. How are you so not self-aware? This is insane. Wandenreich responds to Generic Eric and says, Xbox stands are akin to panhandlers on the street. I remember back in the day when having an Xbox was like a status symbol and having a PS3 just meant you were poor. Oh, how the tides have turned. That's literally not true. Like, in case you're new to gaming, and there's anything wrong with that, well, welcome to gaming if you're new, but in case you are new, the PlayStation 3 was way more expensive than the Xbox 360, like by a lot. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the Xbox 360 had such a hefty lead over the PS3 in the early days of the 7th console gen, at least in the Western markets. Like, I remember these days very clearly. The PS3 had 2 launch models. One of them was $500 and the other was $600. Back in like 2006. That was insanity. Microsoft, on the other hand, launched 2 versions of the 360 at $300 and $400. And Microsoft also leaned into that lower price a couple years into the 360's life cycle. Remember the Xbox 360 arcade variant? Remember the Pro variant and the Elite variant and all the different bundles and stuff? The Xbox 360 was very affordable, especially compared to the PS3 in the first few years. Like, it took until the late 2000s and early 2010s for Sony to get with the program and drop the price of the PS3 after a change in leadership. But according to you, the 360 was the rich boy option. Like, I fucking hate when people do this. I was literally there. I lived through this era that you are describing, and it was literally the opposite of what you're describing. Isn't modern social media fun? Jamie Morin, who is a gigantic Xbox shill, by the way, before I read this, but a broken clock farts twice a day or whatever the saying is. He says, well, looks like Final Fantasy 16 may be coming to Xbox, and especially if you're a fan of the franchise, you want this. And then Jansid responds, you don't deserve a fucking lousy beggars, you just want free stuff, shit Americans. Okay, just so we're clear, if you want the option to purchase Final Fantasy 16 on the Xbox, apparently that's because you just want free stuff. And also you're a shit American. Sorry to all the non-American viewers out there who wanted a Final Fantasy 16 port. Apparently you don't exist. I wonder what other garbage opinions you're holding in that giant fucking nose of yours. Like, Jesus Christ, that is a fucking schnoz. Rizgi Gumular responds to the news of a potential Xbox port and says, but why? Final Fantasy series always sell the most on PlayStation. Also, most Japan AAA third-party games are PlayStation exclusives anyways. So there's no point in putting these games on Xbox or Nintendo. Actually, it's interesting that you bring this up. Final Fantasy 15 reportedly sold 20% of its copies on the Xbox, which is certainly way less than the competing PS4 at the time that this stat was taken. This stat was taken before the launch of the PC version, or at the very least before any sales were confirmed. But that's still 1 out of every 5 copies going to an Xbox player. And Final Fantasy 15 sold over 10 million copies. So I'll let you do the math on how many million Xbox copies of Final Fantasy 15 were sold. Like, saying Final Fantasy has insignificant sales on the Xbox is a classic example of the, oh, one is better, therefore the other is terrible argument. Like, yeah, way more copies of the PS4 version of Final Fantasy 15 were sold than the Xbox version, but the Xbox version still sold a few million copies. And the success of Final Fantasy 15 on the Xbox is likely a major reason why earlier this month, Final Fantasy 14 Online finally got its Xbox port. Granted, it had the absolute worst release timing you could have ever asked for, but hey, that's just goofy old Square Enix for you. The point I'm getting at here is that the Xbox absolutely has a buying base for Final Fantasy, and just because it's smaller than the PlayStation's buying base for Final Fantasy doesn't mean it's insignificant or unprofitable or unwise to expand upon. And all this is just so ironic considering the fact that Final Fantasy is not Sony's property. It literally never has been. But the PlayStation guys are so fucking defensive over it. It's bizarre. Like, you can't claim ownership of a franchise that didn't start on your platform and isn't even exclusive to your platform. Final Fantasy is not Sony's franchise. They just like to rub their nuts on it every couple years. It's so weird how defensive you guys are of it. Crypto Twin Maddie says, well, they probably won't be able to get it to work on the Switch or Switch 2 without butchering the game, and Xbox players will only be interested in it if it's on Game Pass. I think it'll just get the PC launch. I just love the complete ignoring of Xbox game sales. Xbox players absolutely buy games that are not on Game Pass. The people who genuinely think Game Pass is the only way that people interact with games on the Xbox, you people need to go outside. Like, that is an opinion that is exclusively held by people that are online too much. And all you have to do to prove this is open up the Xbox Live Store, sort games by most popular, and what you'll find is what I found here. A huge chunk of the most popular games on the Xbox consoles are paid titles not on Game Pass. Again, just because one is bigger doesn't mean the other is absolute shitty poopy dog shit. But even if you were right here and Xbox gamers only cared about Game Pass games, if you're Square Enix in that situation and Microsoft offers you a big sack of cash to make an Xbox version of the game, like if they're guaranteed a cash return on the port and they're happy with that cash return on the port enough to make the game, genuinely, why would you be upset that it was on Game Pass? Like, who would be hurt in that scenario? Buckbreaker says it won't sell anything on Xbox though. See previous point about how Final Fantasy has done perfectly well on the Xbox in the very recent past. You guys are weird. You guys are so weird. I don't have an outro for this one. If you're still here, just keep an eye on the channel next week. I have a cool promotional thing that's going on next week. Keep an eye on that. Okay, whatever. You guys are weird. Toodles.